In the heart of the galaxy, where stars hung like frozen fireworks in the black sky, there floated a colossal station named Eriandus Prime, an Alliance-built space citadel where dozens of alien species met to discuss peace, trade, science, and power. The grand hall of the council chamber buzzed with deep voices, strange languages, and occasional flares of biolight from beings not born under any human sun. Then, the doors opened and a human stepped in. Lieutenant Commander Eli Ward walked calmly through the center aisle, his dark uniform spotless, his back straight, and his expression unreadable. Around him, beings at least twice his height turned their eyes, or whatever they used to see, and chuckled, whispered, or outright laughed. Eli, standing just under 6 feet, looked like a child beside the armored bulk of the Exarnathi, or the towering insect limbs of the Kray's hull. One of the gas-based derelicts shifted their form into a smaller, squishier shape as a mockery, while others snorted in amusement. The Exarnathi ambassador, a broad-shouldered brute named Gortal, grinned, revealing rows of bone-crushing teeth. "This is the human? This small thing," he growled in a thick accent. "Your homeworld sends prey to speak among predators." The council chamber echoed with cold laughter. But Eli did not flinch. He gave a respectful nod and took his assigned seat, which had been accidentally built 2 sizes too large for him. He sat anyway, his fingers gently tapping the console in front of him, eyes calmly observing every detail. His gaze swept across the chamber, not with fear, but calculation. It was not the look of a prey animal. It was the look of a hunter behind patient eyes. Still, the mockery continued for hours. Every delegate's speech seemed to include some slight jab at humans: soft skin, short lifespan, tiny muscles, emotional instability. The Exarnathi made it a game. How many insults could they deliver before the humans snapped or left? But Eli didn't rise to their bait. Instead, he watched. He listened. And he smiled just slightly, as if he knew something no one else did. That evening, at the diplomatic reception, he stood quietly near the edge of the gathering, while other species engaged in loud, showy conversations. Some tried to intimidate him by stepping too close, or towering over him, or showing off strange alien weapons built into their bodies. Eli simply sipped a glass of sparkling green fluid that smelled like mint and rust, listening to every word, every movement. Eventually, one curious delegate, a smaller amphibious being named Trennick, approached him and asked, "Why don't you speak back? They mock you. Don't humans care about pride?" Eli tilted his head slightly and replied, "Pride without purpose is just noise. Let them laugh." Trennick blinked his large eyes. "You're planning something." Eli smiled. "No, I'm waiting." That same night, news broke across the station. The Predator Games would return. An ancient tradition of the Eriandus Alliance, the games were meant to showcase survival, strength, hunting, and tactical prowess among species. It was more show than battle, but still dangerous. And this time, for the first time ever, the humans had been invited to participate. Most thought it was a joke, another insult wrapped in ceremony. Gortal roared with laughter when Eli's name was listed as a competitor. "He'll be eaten before the first bell," someone shouted, but Eli accepted the invitation without a word, without hesitation. The room went silent for a moment. Not because they respected him, no, not yet, but because they didn't understand why a human would accept a death sentence so calmly. As the crowd murmured, and bets were already being placed on how fast he would lose, Eli turned to face the viewing window that looked out into the blackness of space. Stars shimmered like ancient eyes. He placed a hand on the glass and whispered words no one heard. He didn't care for the laughter behind him. He was thinking about the challenge ahead. Because humans, small though they were, had hunted monsters before. On Earth, In jungles, in oceans, in the darkest parts of history, they had faced tooth and claw, shadow and scale. And they had survived. Now it was the galaxy's turn to learn what it meant to underestimate the small one. The announcement of the Predator Games sent waves of excitement across Eriandus Prime. Every screen, hallway and conversation buzzed with the upcoming event. These games were no ordinary sport. They were a test of survival, instinct, and raw power, meant to showcase which species deserved to be considered the galaxy's true hunters. Every cycle, warriors from powerful civilizations stepped forward to claim dominance, and each time, the Xanathi stood undefeated. Their brutal size and strength crushed opponents before most challenges even began. This year, however, something unusual had happened. A human Lieutenant Commander, Ely Ward, had agreed to compete. At first, everyone thought it was a clerical mistake or some strange diplomatic joke. But when Ely calmly stepped forward and signed his name under the registration holofield, the room went quiet, then exploded with laughter. "He'll last 5 minutes," one of the Krays Hall whispered. "They'll be scraping him off the jungle floor," said another. But Ely didn't argue, didn't boast, and didn't respond to the sneers. Instead, he trained. Quietly, every morning before the artificial lights rose on the station, he ran long laps through the low-gravity corridors. He studied the environments used in past games: zero-G caverns, frozen forests, dense alien jungles filled with predators, and made plans. He practiced old Earth survival techniques, tying makeshift traps from wires, mapping escape routes, and adjusting his suit for speed rather than armor. While others flexed muscles and showed off weapons built into their arms or tails, Ely focused on precision, endurance, and stealth. The opening ceremony arrived, and the arena flickered to life on a distant moon converted into a simulation zone, one massive environment capable of mimicking any planet. The competitors stood on platforms high above the ground, each one a monstrous figure carved by evolution or technology. Ely stood among them, smaller than all the others, but with a calmness that unsettled a few observant watchers. As the countdown echoed, Gortal smirked and pointed a claw at Ely. "Run fast, little prey. You might live long enough to scream." Ely simply checked his wristband and gave a small nod. Then, the signal rang and the games began. Competitors dropped into a thick alien jungle filled with moving shadows, strange plants, and hidden dangers. The Xanathi stormed forward like tanks, crushing trees and hunting loudly. The insectoid Krays Hall moved with clicking limbs, weaving webs and traps. Others used fire, scent, and sound to hunt. Ely did none of those things. He vanished. No one saw where he went. For hours, nothing on the monitors showed his signal. Some thought he was dead already, hiding or frozen in fear. But slowly, one by one, something began to happen. Larger predators, meant to chase and test the hunters, began disappearing from the field. Some were found unconscious, bound in old Earth snare traps. Others were lured into pits, hidden under leaves, where they roared in frustration. The watching crowds were confused. These tactics weren't part of the usual spectacle. They were primitive, but they worked. Ely wasn't hunting like a warrior. He was hunting like an apex predator of Earth. Silent, calculating, waiting for the right moment. When the competitors finally crossed paths again, they weren't laughing anymore. One of the Krays Hall had lost half their limbs to a trap. Another creature, from the icy moons of Vairix, was limping, covered in mud and vines. Ely emerged from the trees then, quiet and covered in dust, eyes sharp and movements controlled. He didn't attack with rage or noise. He used speed, angles, terrain. He moved like a shadow, striking fast, retreating, never staying in one place. He knew where to hide. He knew how to wait. It wasn't about muscles, it was about the mind. By the time the first day ended, the leaderboard showed something no one expected. The human was in second place, just a few points behind Gortal, who now looked less amused and more focused. Whispers filled the observation decks. Delegates leaned in closer. A few began asking questions about Earth's history of predators: lions, wolves, bears, sharks. Someone mentioned human special forces, old war units that trained to survive impossible odds. Trennock, the small amphibian delegate who had once spoken to Eli, watched in awe. He turned to his fellow diplomats and said softly, "They all mocked him, but I think he's hunting us all." And far below, in the jungle that was not a jungle, Eli Ward smiled to himself, his breath calm, his heart steady. The games had only just begun. The second day of the Predator Games dawned with a strange quietness. The simulation moon, once full of motion and noise, now held an uneasy silence as the remaining competitors moved more carefully, scanning every tree, every sound, every shadow. Word had spread. The human was winning, not with power, but with planning, traps, patience. Some now feared crossing paths with him more than they feared the creatures hidden in the jungle. Eli Ward, still calm and focused, had made it clear he wasn't prey, and he wasn't a joke. Even the proud Axarnathi warrior Gortal had stopped laughing. But far above the jungle, inside the control room of Eriandus Prime, something went terribly wrong. Deep inside the restricted sectors of the station, an emergency alarm began flashing: containment breach. Red lights blinked, warning signals echoed, and engineers scrambled to respond, their faces pale. Locked in the most secure section of the biological vault was a creature known as the Dravarian apex predator, unlike anything natural. It had been grown in secret labs for study, enhanced with speed, strength, and instinct sharpened beyond any known species. It was meant to be used for future war simulations, kept sedated at all times. But now it was awake and free. The council went into chaos. The Predator Games were being watched live by billions across the galaxy, and a real, uncontrolled monster had just slipped into the simulation zone. The safety barriers failed. The council considered ending the games, evacuating the competitors, and sealing off the moon. But before they could act, the Dravari landed. The jungle trembled as it entered. Massive, black-scaled, moving low like a shadow with burning red eyes. It was a perfect killer. The first to encounter it was a four-armed warrior from the flame worlds of Tarkon. In less than a minute, he was gone. Nothing left but blood and silence. Cameras caught only a glimpse, a blur, a roar, and then static. Panic spread among the remaining hunters. One by one, signals were lost, not because of games, but because of death. For the first time in history, the Predator Games became real. And in the heart of the jungle, Eli Ward knew something had changed. The air smelled different. The birds had gone silent. The usual low hum of alien insects vanished. He found crushed trees, blood trails, and deep claw marks on stones no normal creature could scar. He crouched, studied the tracks, touched the wounds in the bark. This was no part of the game. This was something alive. Something hunting not for points or glory, but for instinct. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He adjusted. Eli climbed high into the trees, changed direction, circled through rivers, and erased his trail. He built new traps, faster and sharper, using old Earth combat knowledge mixed with materials from the alien world. He crafted a spear from bone and metal, balanced it, and waited. Over the next hours, the simulation became a nightmare. Screams echoed. One competitor activated their emergency beacon only to have it torn apart before help could arrive. Another tried to fly away, but was dragged from the sky mid-air. The watchers, once entertained, now stared in horror. And still, Eli moved like a ghost. Then it happened. Near a shallow stream, under heavy roots, he saw it. The Dravari. It was larger than anything he had faced, taller than a tank, muscles like armor, claws like swords. It sniffed the air, paused, then turned its head toward him. Eli didn't run. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked onto the beast. For a moment, the entire jungle seemed to hold its breath. The predator growled, then lunged. Eli rolled under its swing, sliced at its leg with his spear, and vanished into the trees. What followed was not a fight. It was a hunt. Back and forth, the two predators circled each other, one by design, one by experience. Hours passed. Eli used fire, water, terrain, noise. He studied its patterns, learned its reactions. The Dravari grew frustrated, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, none fatal but all placed with purpose. Finally, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon and false night filled the sky, Eli stood at the center of a large pit, the ground covered in leaves. The Dravari charged, roaring. Eli stood still, and just before impact, he dove aside. The creature fell straight into the hidden trap Eli had spent hours digging. Deep spikes of alloy and stone pierced its limbs, not fatally, but enough to pin it down. The Dravari thrashed, roared, then stopped, breathing heavily, bleeding, staring up at the small human who stood above it, unarmed, fearless. And then, the impossible happened. The apex predator lowered its head and knelt. Cameras across the galaxy caught the moment. A beast made to rule had submitted. Not to power, but to control, to patience, to the mind of a human. And far above, in the council chamber, silence fell as every alien realized they had misunderstood the meaning of strength. The jungle was silent after the beast knelt, the wind barely whispering through the thick alien leaves, as if even nature itself paused to witness what had happened. Across the galaxy, the moment was replayed again and again. Lieutenant Commander Eli Ward, the smallest competitor, standing above the defeated apex predator, unshaken and calm. News feeds called it a miracle, while others called it a warning. The Predator Games had never seen anything like this. Council members sat frozen in their high towers, stunned into silence. No one cheered, no one mocked. For the first time, the laughter that had echoed through every conversation about humans had vanished, replaced by cautious respect and deep, uneasy curiosity. The Dravari, though still alive, refused to attack again. It remained inside the trap, watching Eli with something close to recognition, not rage. When retrieval ships arrived, it didn't resist capture. It let the human approach, check its wounds, and even touch its armored hide. Eli said nothing to the cameras, gave no grand speech, and offered no celebration. He simply signaled that he was ready to return. Back on Iriandus Prime, when he stepped out of the shuttle, the delegates and soldiers gathered to see him not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to see the one who had changed the meaning of the games. Gortal, the proud Exarnathi, who had once laughed the loudest, stood at the front, arms folded and jaw tight. For a moment, it seemed he might challenge Eli then and there, but instead, he lowered his head in a slow, controlled nod. It wasn't surrender, but it was respect. Later, in a quiet chamber reserved for victors, Eli sat alone, watching the stars outside the glass wall, his face thoughtful. He hadn't come to prove a point. He had come to represent what humanity truly was, more than muscles or size, more than emotion or speed. He knew they had doubted him from the beginning. They had called humans weak, soft, emotional, reckless. And yet, it was that very combination, empathy with strategy, instinct with patience, that had allowed him to survive when stronger creatures had failed. As he stared into the endless night, Trennick arrived once more, the small amphibian looking up at him with wide eyes. "You've changed things," he said quietly. Eli shook his head. "Not changed," reminded them. We weren't always the biggest on Earth either, but we adapted. We endured. Trennick hesitated, then asked, "What happens now?" That was the question the entire galaxy was asking. Already, other species were reviewing human history, digging through records of ancient Earth predators and military training. Some viewed it with awe, others with fear. The council itself called for a private meeting, not to punish Eli, but to discuss a new order. The Predator Games, once a tradition of power and intimidation, would now need new rules because dominance had been redefined. No longer would size or strength alone decide worth. The human had shown that cleverness, control, and calm under pressure could break even the most dangerous creatures. And yet, not everyone was happy. In shadowed corners of the galaxy, there were whispers. Some powerful species, those who had built their legacy on brute force, now saw humanity as a threat. Not because of their weapons, but because of their mind. A small species that could tame monsters was more dangerous than any army. Back in his quarters, Eli packed his simple gear without ceremony. He wasn't seeking fame, and he didn't care for statues or medals. He had proven what he needed to. As he walked toward his ship, a group of young cadets from several species stood at attention, saluting him not because they were told, but because they believed. He nodded once and boarded. As the ship lifted into orbit, the stars ahead looked closer than ever. He had left a mark, not just in the arena, but in the minds of every being who had watched. A legacy, not of destruction, but of discipline. Not of shouting, but silence. A hunter's legacy, not carved in blood, but in respect. And though he said nothing of his next mission, many already wondered, what happens when a galaxy of predators learns to fear the calm eyes of a human? Weeks passed since the end of the Predator Games, yet the echo of what Eli Ward had done still spread across the stars like fire through dry grass. On every colony, every warship, and every diplomatic station, the story was told how a small human outsmarted giants, tamed a creature bred to destroy, and walked out of the arena not as a survivor, but as something more. Some called him the Shadow Hunter, others the Quiet Apex. But Eli didn't care for titles. He had returned to duty aboard a small exploratory vessel away from the attention, continuing his work like nothing had changed. Yet something had changed deeply and permanently. The Galactic Council, after long debate, declared a new class of recognition in the games, not for brute strength, but for tactical mastery. They called it the Apex Mind. And the first ever holder of that honor was a human. Still, not all were pleased. In secret, those who once ruled by fear felt that their grip was weakening. To them, the idea that strength could be defeated by strategy was dangerous. Among them was a group known as the Velka Dominion, an empire of warlords and mercenaries who thrived in chaos and dominance. They saw Eli as a symbol that needed to be broken. A message had to be sent. Humans may have won a game, but they could never rule fear. So they set a trap. A distress signal was sent from a civilian transport deep in unmonitored space. It bore the markings of a diplomatic vessel from a neutral world. Eli's ship was the closest. As always, he answered the call without hesitation. When he arrived, he found the transport drifting. No life signs, doors open, lights flickering. A classic setup, but he entered anyway, calm and alert. Within minutes, he knew it was an ambush. But instead of retreating, he moved deeper. He didn't draw his weapon first. He studied the shadows, the angles, the scent of the air. When the attack came, he was already moving. The Velka operatives were elite, fast, armored, and merciless. But they weren't hunters. They were soldiers trained in control, not in survival. Eli didn't meet them head-on. He led them through narrow corridors, separated them, turned their numbers into confusion. He shut off lights, rerouted power, used the ship itself as a weapon. One by one, they fell not killed, but defeated in ways that humiliated them. Their gear jammed, their comms blocked, their weapons gone. He faced the leader, last a towering brute covered in battle scars, who growled, "You think this makes you a predator? You're just a clever rat in the dark." Eli didn't answer. He threw down his weapon and approached with only his eyes locked forward. When the brute lunged, Eli sidestepped, used his momentum, and brought him to the floor with a swift, practiced move. Then he leaned in and whispered, "A predator doesn't roar before the strike. It waits and ends it clean." When authorities arrived hours later, they found the Velka team alive, tied, and unconscious, with a full report already uploaded to the council. Eli gave no statement. He returned to his ship and left without a word. But the message had been delivered. Not by force, by precision, by control. The very traits that the galaxy now began to associate with humans. Back on Earth, no one celebrated loudly. But inside quiet military halls and training grounds, recruits trained harder, knowing that out there, respect had been earned the hard way. Across alien academies, new programs began studying human warfare, psychology, even Earth's ancient hunters. The image of strength was changing. Not taller, not louder, but smarter. Somewhere in deep space, Eli Ward sat again by a viewing window, watching the stars drift past like thoughts in a quiet mind. He had never wanted to be a legend. He only wanted to show the truth. That in a galaxy full of monsters and giants, the most dangerous thing wasn't always the loudest roar or the biggest claw. It was the one who watched, who waited, who struck only when it counted. And now the predators knew. They had laughed once. They had mocked. But now, even titans paused when they heard quiet footsteps in the dark. Because every predator, no matter how mighty, must one day face the due of the one thing they never feared enough: a human.